Hi there, my name is Andy Farquharson and I'm your host on Alternative Exit, the podcast dedicated to educating small business owners about the possibilities, benefits and challenges of transitioning to an employee ownership model. Did you know that there are over 200 million SMEs around the globe with an owner that will be retiring within the next 10 years? Many of these owners will never actually find a buyer for their business, forcing them to close their doors, wreaking havoc on their employees and the communities. There is an alternative. This show will explore different forms of employee ownership and the best practices for a successful transition. Each episode is going to feature interviews with experts on employee ownership, business owners who've successfully made the transition, and consultants who've helped facilitate these changes. Okay, now let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome everybody to the Alternative Exit. Today we are joined by Maureen Conway. Maureen is the Vice President at the Aspen Institute and the Executive Director of its Economic Opportunities Program. During her time there, she's been a leading voice in shaping conversations around how employee ownership can build a more inclusive and equitable economy. She's overseen significant research and advocacy on how broad-based ownership models can help reduce inequality, enhance job quality, and create shared prosperity. In this episode, we're going to dive into Maureen's work and explore the transformative potential of employee ownership and discuss its role in creating long-term economic equity, which is super important in today's world. So, Maureen, welcome to the Alternative Exit.
Thank you for having me, Andy. Great to be here.
Okay, fantastic. So, look, you've been an advocate for employee ownership for a long time, and really sort of as a core basis of its strategy for reducing inequality. I mean, what first inspired your interest in this field and how has that shaped your work?
Yeah, great question. My work has really focused on people who are struggling in today's economy, right? People who are trying to get to better jobs, maybe start their own business, but really are, really struggling to make ends meet. And what struck me about employee ownership is a few things. One, you mentioned my interest in job quality, and that really has been kind of the pull for me, is that the quality of jobs created in employee-owned companies tend to be really, much better when you look at sort of the data on pay and like retirement savings and all of those important things that give people a more stable job. But the other thing, one of the things that really struck me when one of the first employee-owned companies I ever went to visit was actually a co-op. It was Cooperative Home Care Associates in the South Bronx. They do home-based care, right? So they do care for elderly patients in their home. And what struck me talking to the people who worked there was not just, how does this make your schedule? They had more stable schedules than is typical in home health care. They had a somewhat higher wage, but, is constrained by what you can do. They had some, sort of better benefit kind of things like that. But what really struck me was how those women, it's pretty much women, really felt so much more respected in that environment, right? Like how they felt more included, they felt they were listened to, supported, and their experience of work and just their sense of self-worth in that context was just really, it was a notable difference. And I think that that's what really kind of captured my heart for employee-owned companies.
That's great. I'm so glad you shared that, because look, a lot of people, when they hear, it's just better jobs and better job quality for people. People don't think that people still have a job to do. Right? When you talk about home care, there are still some potentially things that may be unpleasant to actually have to do in terms of the tasks, but how you do it and the environment in which you do it and how you interact with people, they're the things that really change.
Right, exactly. And how, the relationship that you have with your coworkers and with your company also really changes, right? Because you do feel that you are part of it. You do feel respected for the work that you do. You are an owner, right? You get to, people also, people have these misconceptions about employee-owned companies, right? They think, how do they ever get anything done? Because everybody thinks they're the boss and like all these kinds of crazy things, right? And it's like, no, they kind of work like other companies do in so many ways, right? But I think there is a somewhat of a difference in terms of people feeling that if they do have a concern or do have a suggestion, right, that they have standing to bring it forward And there is a different kind of relationship where they do have the respect of management, and management responds to that, right? So it's less of a command and control and more we're in this together kind of environment, right? If you build that kind of ownership culture. So,
Yeah.
and I just think that that's so important when we think about work. And I'd like to take a beat, if you don't mind, just because it is the day after election day. And we did just get an election result. And people did once again say, I'm concerned about how well I'm doing in this economy and I want to see change, right?
Yeah.
And how we all feel about the change and whether they'll get the change they're looking for. I know many people have different opinions about this, but I do think that for the past 15 years that a lot of people are looking, saying that the country's not on the right track. Just tells us that the state of our economy is not really working for everybody, and how work is structured is not working for millions of working people. And I think employee owned companies really do show a different way, and a way that really can address some of these critical challenges that we're facing in our country, and people are trying to communicate them. And I think this could be a really vital part of the solution.
Yeah, look, you've talked about that before. Where it's like that. Look, we are in this like a crisis of social trust, and which is sort of bleeding into democracy. As I said, people looking for a change, whether or not it's happening by their choices, and like the way that we've organised business today is definitely exacerbating those problems with that command and control structure that is pervasive. I mean, with employee ownership being as an alternative approach, it'd be great to sort of learn a little bit more about like what are some of the things that you're doing at sort of the Aspen Institute to be able to help promote and drive those like companies to transition to this new model.
Yeah. So, well, one of the things we do is for the past few years, we've been running something called the Employee Ownership Ideas Forum. And really, we're trying to elevate employee ownership and get the attention of policymakers and others who are interested in economic policy to pay more attention to this as a strategy, and how this strategy could really work and make a difference in communities. And there are a whole variety of ways that are sort of small business support systems and economic development systems don't really work for employee owned companies, right? There's issues in terms of like, how access to capital works, right? And sort of wanting to have a singular owner rather than broad based ownership when you're sort of addressing some financing issues. There's issues of how different sort of like small business development programs focus on entrepreneurs and try to include different entrepreneurs, but they don't really have a way of considering broad-based ownership. There's issues of how our workforce development system works and how it doesn't really address some of the particular kind of training needs that employee-owned companies are trying to address when they're particularly in the moment of transition, as they're trying to educate their employees about what does it mean to have an employee owned company, and how do we sort of, what does this mean for your job? What does this mean in terms of how do you understand the company financials? How do you understand your equity statement? How do you participate as an owner in this company, right? So there's more that the workforce development system could do to support it. So there's all these systems that sort of connect with community economic development that aren't like, they're not really purpose made for employee ownership, and yet they should be, because employee owned companies are like a force multiplier for them to achieve their purpose. So so that's why we wanted to really elevate it for policymakers so they pay a little bit more attention. We also wanted to elevate it to, start like really kind of just getting people to pay attention and chipping away at some of those myths about that I was mentioning earlier about employee-owned companies, like that they're like everybody's the boss, they're unworkable, they're unscalable. There's some very large employee-owned companies, right? So just trying to raise that awareness and showing people what's possible, and then like what are some of the ideas that could really help expand that opportunity for millions more Americans all across the country.
Yeah, that's fantastic work. Like, it was great to see how animated and excited you got when talking about like employee ownership as a force multiplier, right? No, not just for business, but also for the employees that work there. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, I could say other things we're doing. I mean, sort of that's like a big picture event. Then we also do things, so that we can reach different actors on the ground, right? We spend a lot of time talking to, different agencies, like I mentioned, workforce development and economic development and community development finance institutions and other organizations on the ground that are sort of touching small, medium-sized businesses that are working with workers and trying to give them tools and information that they can use. So we put together profiles, of state employee ownership centers so that other states might learn from what different states are doing. We put together profiles of businesses so that other organizations can see, oh, that's how an employee-owned business works, or maybe they can share that with other businesses that might transition, right? So we do these kinds of things where we put together tools and profiles and information to try to reach those actors on the ground that can use that information and really start to think about their own practice and how employee ownership. So we're trying to do, the both and thing, right? Like reach the folks on the ground that are out there every day doing the work and try to figure out what they need and provide resources that are helpful to them, and also reach the folks, sort of with the big megaphones and the policy decisions and sort of raise things up for them and help them learn more about it too. So.
Okay. When you think about that ideas forum, what are some of those sort of more exciting, innovative ideas and solutions that have come out of the forum, whether they've been implemented or not yet?
Yeah. Oh gosh. So now I'm going to my inability to remember specific names of things, right? So I think one of the things we were trying to highlight was just an idea to sort of expand capital for employee-owned companies. Senator Van Hollen and Senator Rubio introduced a bill a couple of years ago, the name of which is not coming to me in
That's
this.
all right. We'll put a link. We'll put a link to the note in the notes.
Thank you. Okay. But I think that was an interesting idea that we were trying to lift up, right? So that's addressing one of those issues. Last year we had a panel that included folks from the Department of Labor, somebody from SBA, somebody from the White House. Did we have somebody from agriculture that year? Anyway, we had, there's like Treasury, Commerce, all of these agencies touch this issue, right? And so, in different ways. So we were having all of those folks and from some of the ideas that the audience was able to bring to the panel and the panel was able to share with them, they were able to move some things forward that were really opening up opportunity for companies that wanted to transition to employee ownership, and we're really trying to figure out the how and make that process a little smoother, at least for the policies they touch. So that was really exciting to see, right? And then we had people talking about just, some of the things we were talking about earlier in terms of what they have observed as they have people in their workplace have more participation in the workplace, they start to have more civic engagement in their community as well. And I thought that was a really interesting example of how employee-owned companies contribute to their communities in a powerful way.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, it's, a company is just a little microcosm of what's happening out there in a community. Lots of people coming together from different backgrounds, different opinions, and still having to come together and make decisions about how they go to work. Yeah, it's great. It's a great call out. So if we think about, what I also loved about what you're describing there is how some of those sort of actions that you got that are sort of being created with the, like from the legislative, I can almost get that word out today, perspective, are having an immediate impact as well, which is great. But when you think about it from the bottom up, like you talked a little bit more around sort of that the quality, like the quality of jobs at the start. And so, employee ownership is often seen as a tool for both economic equity, and business competitiveness. How do you see those two goals aligning in practice?
Yeah. Well, I think, I think too often we think that those goals are in conflict with each other when they aren't necessarily. So let me first take a beat just to say, what do I think is job quality, right? So when I say job quality, I'm really talking about a job like that provides basic, economic stability, right? So that you know where you're sleeping every night, and sort of the basics, right? So it provides compensation and benefits, a package that provides at least a basic level of economic stability. It provides opportunity, right? It provides opportunity to build wealth. It provides opportunity to learn more, to contribute, to grow in your career, in whatever that might mean for you, right? And it provides respect, right? You have and respect is sort of this term that encompasses a lot of things, right? But it encompasses, all of the like safe working conditions, free from harassment and discrimination, et cetera, right? But it also encompasses what I was talking about earlier, that you listen to workers are listened to, that they have an opportunity to contribute, that their contributions to the company's success is valued and, respected, right? So people are respected for what they do every day. And I think that that's just, so I think that those three things give you a sort of a quality of job. And now I'm going to ask you to repeat your question.
No, it was about how do we share how do you see that the tools of economic sort of equity and also business competitiveness, like coming together within employee ownership structure?
And I think too often we trade off sort of like worker well-being and business competitiveness, and we really need to stop doing that. Especially, I've been, we have a project that I've been out, sort of visiting community development finance institutions and some of the small businesses that they're working with. And those small businesses are concerned that they can't find employees, that their employees aren't particularly engaged. You hear the same thing from larger businesses, right? Like employees aren't engaged and all these kinds of things, right? And it's kind of critical to run your business to have people who want to come and actually do the work and see that as a value to them. So providing them a good job that provides them basic economic stability and opportunity to contribute and to achieve, and an environment of respect, like kind of fundamental to getting people to engage and want to do the work, right? So I think we kind of have this backwards. And, and I think about this as like, if you think about, I went to business school, it's been a while now, right? But, there was sort of this conversation in management about like how to manage people and how to motivate people and how to engage them and how to listen to them. And then there's this conversation over on the finance side about how to manage costs and how to, right? And I feel like it's more of a business mindset problem that you sort of have. On the one hand, people, when you talk about good jobs are good for business and you say all the reasons why, because it engages people, helps people bring their best self to work and helps them, contribute to the company and be working with the company rather than against it, right? Like, kind of makes sense. And they're like, yeah, that's just basic management. But then over here on the finance side, they kind of say like, oh, but we have to like squeeze labor costs. We have to use an algorithm to set people's schedules so they never know when they're going to show up. We're going to try to like, lower their wages so that it's something that they can't live on. And then they can, like hopefully eke their way by with a little earned income tax credit and some food stamps or something. And then we'll complain about them as if they're loafers for getting those kinds of things. I mean, it's a like, these two things don't compute kind of conversation.
Totally.
And I think we really need to start thinking about, and I think about this when I think about sort of our measures of economic success, and we don't look at sort of the well-being of the workforce when we think about, do we have a successful economy, right? We look at sort of, business profits and how's the market doing, and we look at jobs numbers, or we look at, sort of GDP growth, right? But we don't really look at sort of our families feeling better off today than they did, right? And the primary way that most households support themselves is their wage and salary income from their work, right? Like this is if you look at consumer expenditure, et cetera, like this is where the money comes from for the vast majority of households. And if we're just not, and as I said before, that's like just one piece of job quality, right? But if we're not paying attention to what is happening to households as our part of our economic success measures, then we're just missing, I feel like, a big piece of the picture. And I think businesses are missing a big piece of the picture.
I totally agree. Like, I think that those economic measures, or the lack thereof, that support that, go back to your story from business school. which is that when, sure, like people understand, like in management, like they people do get it, like that you're actually dealing with people and they're human beings with their own personalities, strengths, weaknesses, etc. And we've got to put them in the right place. But as soon as you put that over across onto the income statement, and now all of a sudden they're just dials, right? Or
Right.
they're dials we can turn on and off, like
Exactly.
rather and or pieces on a chessboard that we've got to move it around, like which is that's just not the way it works. And
Right.
and I don't know, from when I've been speaking to a lot of people, they sort of identify that employee ownership doesn't cure that, like in a lot of organizations, but at least sort of helps them helps everyone to be able to put that foot forward first. So it still means it creates a better platform for better management.
Right. And I think that that's important to say, right? Because nothing is a cure all, right? So just making a company employee owned is not going to cure all of the world's ills, right? But it starts to, like you said, make a platform for taking steps forward, right? And I think about sort of, and this is, I hear folks talk about like how we've seen over the past several decades kind of this more national income going towards profits and capital and less going towards labor, right? And we've definitely seen huge growth and gains in the stock market and stuff. And yet the concentration of ownership of equities is significant, right? I think
Yeah.
it was like over, the top, I think 10% of households own over 90% of equities in the stock market. I mean, that's just a remarkable concentration of wealth in a very small number of hands, right? So I think if we're really going to try to think about this question of how can people benefit, we want everybody to work and we want everybody to contribute to the economy. So, but how are we going to make sure that it's worthwhile for them to actually do that? If we're not going to give them wages, we should at least give them a stake, right? So they should have a stake in what they're doing. I mean, wages need to go up, but I mean, I just look at too many places. Like
Totally agree.
I just did this, analysis for the DC metropolitan region where, you look at the jobs and if you look at them by major occupational categories and whatever, like roughly 33% of jobs aren't paying enough for a single adult living alone, right? It's crazy. It's crazy. How does this is not a sustainable system. So we really need to start figuring out how we turn this around, how we address this challenge, and how we include more people, both include their talents and include them in the rewards.
Okay. So if we're looking ahead, like what do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities for scaling employee ownership?
That's a great question because I think this is a question that comes up all the time. If it's so great, why doesn't it scale? And because it hasn't scaled, people presume that it doesn't work, right? That's another thing that people do. And I think so much of the research shows, that it does work in terms of like you can run a highly successful, competitive business in this manner, right? So I think some of the barriers to scale were some of the things that I mentioned earlier, right? Sort of we have a lot of sort of incentives and supports and things for individually owned businesses and not so much for broadly held businesses, right? So that's one, and there's lots of things. So if you start to break that down, that can start to address some of those problems. Uh, I know my friends in the ESOP Association would be saying this issue of sort of valuation has been holding companies back from transitions for a long time. I think there's hope that, the rule that's coming out will be the adequate consideration rule that's coming out will be a positive step forward and we'll finally start to resolve some of that uncertainty and be able to create more clarity around that point. So there are some positive changes I think that are happening that can start to address some of those kinds of barriers. I think we sometimes confuse incentives for individuals and incentives for businesses because I think sometimes it would be in the businesses long-term health and better for a more inclusive employee-owned or similar kind of structure. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's best for the individual, right?
Yep.
So I think, thinking that through a little bit more in our economic policy making and how we try to rejigger some of those incentives that have people kind of working the system for their individual benefit, even if it's not for the sort of broad business and societal benefit, I think it's an important point to.
Could you dig into that a little bit more, Maureen? Like, where are you seeing that coming to fruition today?
Yeah. Well, I would say, and my colleague, Judy Samuelson, who runs the Aspen Institute Business and Society program, I mean, she's done work on this kind of thing for years, looking at sort of the long-term versus short-term kind of profit. And sort of it's, there's a lot of pressure for a lot of businesses to maximize their short-term profits, even if that means sort of undermining the business for their long-term innovation, health, and growth, right? So I think that that's been kind of and she would be an expert on that to talk to. But I think it's those kinds of dynamics, right, where you can see, a business, being able to sort of do short-term profit taking, but long-term, maybe it's an example that comes to mind just because I remember doing this with in a session with a Quick Trip, a gas station convenience store chain. So partly employee owned, right? They have an ESOP and they do equity sharing and a variety of things, and they have pretty good jobs. And, their growth strategy was basically not to have people who are ready to, it's basically a slow growth strategy, right? Like, we're going to wait till we have people who are ready to go run a store. Like, then they'll hire people and they'll be building like talent. And it's kind of a people-centered growth strategy, but it's a slow strategy, but a steady strategy. It surprised me. I didn't grow up where there are Quick Trips. I don't have a lot of Quick Trips around here. So it has surprised me because they say, oh, and if you talk to people, and it has surprised me when I've met people, they do talk about Quick Trip, like they really love them. I'm like, interesting. So, so I bring them up because I think they have said, like, we could make a lot, what struck me talking to some of the leadership of the company, right, was we could make a lot more money for ourselves right now, particularly if we wanted to like just sell the company or we wanted to, but we're like happy that we're making not just ourselves millionaires, but lots of the folks who've been running our stores millionaires and once they retire, right? So I feel like we have to grow fast at all costs. We have to, I feel like some of those dynamics have really worked against kind of a what I like to call a shared success model for a business.
Yeah, look, it's a great story, and I think that sort of I guess aligns that just continues to demonstrate that like if you are able to align incentives, there's more than enough money out there for everyone to have success. Especially sort of going down those paths. Yeah, because there definitely are some markets where if you look at the UK, for example, like exiting to owners, especially in the SMB space and EOT, it's growing massively. It shows sort of what can be done once we do align those incentives for individuals and companies.
Yeah. And, we would get the same questions when we were lifting up organizations like Quick Trip that, and they had better like sales per square foot and lots of metrics in terms of their industry peers and stuff. And but we'd get the same question if, creating good jobs and that's so good, why doesn't everybody do it? And it's not clear that the incentives are aligned for the people who get to make the decisions about what gets done, that there's pressures that push them away from doing that.
Totally. Yeah, look, I think that your colleague with some of the research will also sort of identify, how bad the public markets distort behaviour to inflate executive pay and returns for shareholders sort of come at the expense of the people that are working in the business in the short term. So, yeah, I'm sure that there's many, many examples of that. So if you think, like, what advice would you give to business owners or leaders who are considering a transition to an employee ownership model? If we think about it from sort of top down, now switching gears to coming from the ground up.
Yeah, well, one is, I guess, plan early, and also, start communicating early to your team if you're thinking about this, because I think that's one of the things I've heard from some retiring business owners is that they come to share like this is going to be this great thing, and people are confused. They don't know what it is and they're a little anxious about it, right? So I think, starting to build a plan for that and how you're going to, because it is a great thing for them, but it's complicated, right? So it's going to take a little time for people to wrap their head around, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for what's expected of me? What does that mean for sort of the company's prospects overall? So, so I guess plan early, think about your communications plans. There's a lot of organizations, I shouldn't say a lot, but there are organizations that are out there to help provide support. I wish there were more of them, but so there's the ESOP Association, there's Employee Ownership Expansion Network. I'm going to forget some of my friends now, and so that's going to also be really bad. Maybe we can add some more names in the notes here. But but there are places where you can go, find information about how to do this. There's more and more state employee ownership centers, which are also a great resource. So Colorado, Ohio, Vermont, North Carolina, like all these states have really good employee ownership centers. There's many more. I think there's 20 something last count I had. So, and they've been growing. They've grown a lot in the past several years. So looking for resources so you can get information, advice, get the kind of technical advice that you need, because there are a lot of, issues to consider. But I think, when I talk to business owners that have done this, I think that they just feel really good about being able to keep their business in the community and not, sell it to somebody who might just close it down or consolidate it with another business or something. They feel really good about that they can, for the workers that have been with them for years, often that they're having them carry the work forward and they actually know how to run the business. So that's always a common, right? So the legacy aspects of it, they feel really good about that they've built this business in their community, a community that they may be choosing to stay in, even if they're not running the business anymore, right? And so they feel, good about that they have a good legacy with the business and that the business is going to be there to serve their community. And, they're not doing badly, right? Like there are some good tax incentives for selling to your employees and everything, right? So I think it rewards them in a number of dimensions. But I think my biggest advice would be start planning early.
Yeah, I love that. So Maureen, we're coming to the end of the interview and I'd love to take you through a fast round of questions where I just ask you 3 questions and you offer a quick response. Does that sound all right? Okay.
See how I can do.
See how we go. Okay. So who is the leader that you most admire in employee ownership?
Oh, gosh, there are a number. One I'm going to pick is my colleague and friend, Joseph Blasi. Joseph has been tenacious in promoting the ideas of employee ownership. He has built an amazing group of scholars and practice leaders, and he has just been driven for decades to really try to advance employee ownership in the country. So I'll pick Joseph.
Fantastic. You're not the first person to pick Joseph in this. Okay. So what is your favorite resource on employee ownership?
Oh, gosh. My favorite resource. I don't know if I have a favorite. Democracy Collaborative. There's Project Equity. There's, a number of resources from employee ownership associations. Do I have a favorite resource? I'm trying to build some resources for employee-owned companies on my own website. I don't know if I have a favorite. And I just want to encourage people to find the resources that are out there. I didn't mention the Aspen Institute. There's lots of good resources. Go find them.
We'll put some, you mentioned a few of them. Yeah, and we'll throw some of those links in there. And then the last one is this. Okay, if you speak to a business owner who's sitting on the fence regarding employee ownership, what's something you would say to them?
I guess I would say to them, what's the legacy that you want from your business, and what's the legacy you want in your community for having built this business, over your probably most of your career, and what's the legacy you want to leave for the people who are with you in building this business, for the community that you work in. What's the message you want to leave for your family and friends about what you wanted to accomplish with the business? And how does employee ownership stack up on that score against the alternatives?
That's fantastic, and a great and a great parting message. So, Maureen, if people want to follow you or reach out, how can they learn more about you and the work you're doing at the Aspen Institute?
I'm on LinkedIn, so they can contact me there. They can send me an email. They can. Not on that many social media platforms anymore.
You mentioned you've got a website?
But we do have a website. Yep. So you can, at that aspeninstitute.org, look for the Economic Opportunities Program. And I always love to hear from people. If people are interested in this, please reach out.
Maureen, thank you so much for your time, expertise and leadership, not just on this podcast, but for all the years gone by. Really, truly, truly appreciate it. And thank you very much for joining us on The Alternative Exit.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure being here.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to continue learning about employee ownership as an alternative exit, head across to abettermonday.me for additional links and resources. You can also make sure to subscribe or follow along in your favorite podcast app, and be sure to leave us a 5-star review.